Hello there, Mr. Lee here, and today we're going to look at or analyze the how the author writes about Dipsas the sorceress. What sort of techniques does Ovid use in order to achieve his intentions? We've said in earlier PowerPoints that he has intentions to make Dipsas look either really terrifying or just a little bit pathetic. Now, talking about women having the ability to do wondrous things is not something that is limited to the ancient world, and indeed Cliff Richard also sang about it. So if you're interested, look out for this song, and we'll return to this song actually in more detail later on in this video. So just to go back to his intentions first, Ovid either wishes to make Dipsas sounds terrifyingly powerful to show what Ovid is up against in order to get hold of his love interest, whose name is Corinna. I don't think I've ever mentioned this before. He wants to show what he's up against to get the attention of Corinna. And perhaps he wants to make Dipsas sound ridiculous to show why Corinna should not listen to Dipsas. Because Dipsas is about to give some advice which is not very helpful for Ovid, as Ovid tries to get the attention of Corinna. Okay, now we're bearing in mind of these intentions because actually when the author chooses to use certain techniques in his work, he doesn't just decide to do it because he is, like going down a supermarket alleyway, or he goes, look at this, let's have a bit of alliteration and let's sprinkle in some similes. An author only, or should I say, an author should only use literary techniques if it serves his or her purposes. We all know of that really random or frustrating footballer who decides just to do step over for no apparent reason, and you're like, it's not even, the opposition player is not like even within a meter of you. Why are you doing all these step overs and fancy tricks? A good author should use techniques with purpose, and the purpose should be the message that the author is trying to get across. So if an author uses these tricks and techniques well, he should be able to achieve his intentions for this passage. So when we judge Ovid, we should judge how well Ovid uses the techniques that he used in order to make Dipsas to either look powerful or look ridiculous. Now, the first thing to focus on is the fact that these texts is a piece of poetry. Now, you might have done Petronius before, and Petronius is a text that is not poetry. But this is poetry, and this means that when we analyze it, there's a few more things to bear in mind. Firstly, it has a meter to it. We won't go into a lot of detail, but what you have to understand is just a rhythm in this. And with Ovid, you will notice that the second or the even numbered lines are indented when printed into the text. And what that means is that the meter is one of a longer meter and a shorter meter. The first meter has, lines of odd numbered lines, that's the one, has a hexameter, which means it has 6 feet, and even numbered lines is in pentameter, which means it has 5 feet, and they alternate all through the poetry, which is why when you look at the poem, it's got a longer and a shorter line. It also means that the word positions are fixed. So for example, when you read Petronius, it has it has some line numbers in the way that it's printed for us to make it easier for us to comment on it. But essentially, if you go to another edition, it might have slightly different line numbers because their page is wider or their font is larger. Because what Ovid writes here is poetry though, and because he writes poetry, the words are essentially fixed in that line. And if you look at line 1, for example, the word Leinam will always be the last word of that line. And if you look at line 2, the word Audiat will always be the first word, and the word Nomine will always be the fourth word. So the line and word positions are fixed. Also, poets like Ovid tends to make the word order more fluid. This means that if an adjective describes a noun, they're not necessarily next to each other, and the verbs are not necessarily always at the end of the sentence as they should be. The word order is certainly more fluid than if you're reading a piece of that is not a poetry. The opposite of poetry, or the opposite of verse, is prose. So Petronius is prose, and Ovid, the one that you're reading now, is verse, is poetry. In this poem we're going to consider the following points, and I'm just going to go through it quickly in a moment just to give you an explanation of what these points are. And then once I've gone through the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, the next 8 slides, which is on these 8 bullet points, we will focus in and go through the passage from line 1 to line 18 so that you can see how these points work and so that you can see how it contributes to the intention of the author as well. What I suggest you do at this point is to listen to the explanation of what these things are. These you will have met in Petronius, and they will come up again later on in other texts as well. So you don't necessarily have to take notes, but if you do have any questions, note them down and then put it to me. The last 2 bullet points says S and C, and that means stretch and challenge. If they're a bit more complicated to you, I would say you already have enough points in the first 6 bullet points to sufficiently answer all the questions, so don't worry about it too much. Right, repetition then. Now all these words, apart from the last bullet points, are repeated in the text, and they're repeated for various reasons, to stress various points, I suppose. For example, as quaidam, there is a certain person. I guess he's really trying to get the audience to zoom in to considering the person that Ovid is about to describe. Or when he repeats suspicor, he's almost inviting you to think that actually he's not entirely sure, but then I suspect that that is the case. I've put proavos and atavos, the last bullet point, on there because I know that that's not strictly repetition, but there's an increase of scale. Avos is a grandfather, so proavos, great-grandfather, and atavos, great-great-great-grandfather. There is at least a repetition of ideas and of that main word there, avos in the nominative singular, avos in the accusative plural, as you see there. There's at least a repetition of avos, the idea of grandfather, to show, I guess, how many generations Dipsas is going back to when she raises the dead from the tombs. So these are repetitions. Word order and word positions. Now, as I said before, because Ovid is writing poetry, the line number reflects where the author wishes the word to be in the poem. So the word orders are fixed, and sometimes a word is put at the start of a line or the end of the line to emphasize it. If you think about the fact that poetry is about rhythm, the start of the line is, I guess, where you start off, like you go on a row, and the end of the line is where you stop in anticipation of breathing before you go on to the next line. So they naturally become significant positions in poetry. So as quaidam, for example, is at the first is the first word of the poem, or they are the first words of the poem in the beginning of line 1. So that makes it quite significant. And when you say there is a certain someone, it almost implies that they are not they're special, I guess, or that they deserve attention. So that's why Ovid might put it there. To pick other examples, third bullet point, toto glomeranta nubila, it should be nubila kylo. If you notice, the toto kylo, the whole sky is surrounding the word glomeranta, which means gathered. So I guess the fact that the words whole sky is actually spread out at the edges of that collection of 4 words, it actually mirrors the fact that the whole sky is where the clouds were, and then the verb gather sits in the middle as if it's actually doing the gathering. Yeah, that one is a trickier point, sorry, that's why it's in italics. Listing. The passage is full of lists because he's saying about what Dipsas can do or what Dipsas has done. So any way in which Ovid lists things, and you can mention as a stylistic point. And in fact, if he tries to list them in a way that there's a repetition of words in the start of a bullet point, you could definitely use that in your exam to say how neat he makes his bullet points, his lists. For example, there are 2 lines. There's a couplet where he introduces both parts of a bullet point with the word cum voluit. And for example, in a part of the text, in terms of what she knows, skit bene, she knows well, there are then 3 quids afterwards, and the word quid almost acts as the beginning of bullet point, so that readers and audience can get a sense of where the start of each point of the list is. It adds a sort of structure. Sounds. Okay. Now, there's a repetition of sounds N, S, A, S. You may well be able to find more, but certainly these are some of the ones that I can find. And there's a reason why these sounds are there. They might want to give a certain impression. For example, the sound to give a sense of drunkenness, or slurring of words, so slurred that you would misspell the word drunkenness. Or the sound to give a sense of magical chanting when you make some spells. Maybe Romans have the same ideas as English culture, where it's a bit monotonous and you focus on each syllable, that sort of thing. There are some humorous and striking images. For example, the idea of reversing a river or causing thunder. You tend to remember any instances of the text that are striking and memorable. So making it more ridiculous makes it more memorable to you. And sometimes if it causes you to laugh, it makes it more memorable as well. There are certain prepositional phrases. Prepositions here are like ex in the first example, in the second example, and per in the third example there. Now these words normally go at the start of the things that it describe, but in the second and third bullet points they go in the middle, which is quite apt really, because in the second example it says in her clear eyes. I suppose if it's within and the position of your preposition is inside that, then that means where Ovid has chosen to put the preposition, it mirrors the actual situation of those daylights coming out of her eyes. In the first example, the preposition ex, it's in the beginning. It says Xray nomen habet. It's almost like the name literally comes out of the matter. So out of the matter, name has. The position almost mirrors the position of the words in that phrase almost mirrors what's actually happening there. Ovid also uses comparison in his work. So what he does, for example, is he uses a famous character, or at least famous for the Roman audience at the time, and uses that character to compare Dipsas to, in order to take some of the characteristics of the mythological character onto him. It's like if I were to compare you to Beyonce. All right, it might be because you're very glamorous. It might be because you're a role model. It might not be a perfect comparison, but in many ways, however, I haven't said about the singing, have I? But if I were to call you that, then certainly you would think of the qualities that this famous person would have, and you would map that on to yourself if I were to compare you to someone else. Here, Dipsas is compared to Xray in the sense in line 5, where Dipsas is described as being able to use Ayayan spells. Now, the spells of Ayaya, or the spells that come from Ayaya, are the spells that Xray uses, because Xray lives in Ayaya. This is a reference that the Romans would get no problem, especially because of its audience tends to be someone who is well aware of Roman mythology, or in this case actually is Greek mythology. So they wouldn't struggle to understand that comparison. And by comparing Dipsas to Xray, who is a sorceress, Dipsas would automatically gain the qualities that have been associated with Xray. So the ability to practice magic as a woman sorceress, the ability to do sort of strange things to men. I think he turned the men who visited him into pigs. They were eventually rescued, thankfully. And being a bit of an enchantress, someone who sort of puts other people under a spell. I don't necessarily just mean that magically, but I mean that in terms of people just seems enchanted by her, like in awe of her, and they don't quite know how to respond when they're around her, which makes her a little bit sinister, I suppose. If you want to know more, read more of one of the oldest, in fact the oldest Western epic, the greatest Western epic, the Odyssey, and I'm sure you could know more about Xray there. Right, the next one is a stretch and challenge one, and I think I will give you a reference to a chapter of a book. It's only a few pages, so if you're a map student or you're interested in learning more about Ovid as a writer and how he uses his skills generally, you should certainly read that chapter. And what you'd find is that in his collection of Amores, this text was extracted from Amores book 1, poem 8, right? The book of Amores is written as a series of poems about love, and they almost work together. The whole book works together as a storyline from poem 1 to, I think it's poem 15, with a start and an end and things in the middle. This is poem 8, so it's the middle poem. So all the love poetry that he writes is in elegiac couplets. As I've explained, that means one long line, one short line. What you might be able to do as you look through the poem is to pick out that quite often any contrasts or any similar structures are put into one of the couplets. So if you think of line 1 and line 2 working together, line 3 and line 4, then line 5 and line 6, so on. If you look at them as a pair, quite often you'd find that they form their own independent units. perhaps at times almost even a bit like a sentence. So, for example, in one of the lines, he talks about what Dipsas knows well, and what the three things that she knows well, using quid as a way of introducing the three things, are in one of these couplets. In another one, where he describes about Dipsas flying and having feathers, those 2 points are in a couplet together. So again, the couplet works as a unit, and it makes it rather neat. Now, sometimes when you hear politicians speak, you notice that they speak in chunks. They might finish a sentence and then think about where to go next, or give themselves a natural pause. I think that using couplets as a unit serves a very similar purpose. And of course, Ovid has written all this down, so he doesn't need to think where to go next necessarily. But for the audience, for the people who listens to his poetry, it allows you to organize your mind after every 2 lines. And it basically serves as a methodology of reading the poem. This is part of a stretch and challenge, and if you feel you're okay with all the other points, you should definitely look out for a couplet. Although the more I think about it, sometimes this is probably one of the easier points rather than a more difficult one, because you can just see what is described across the pair of lines to see what purpose he's trying to serve. More difficult perhaps is the next point, which is variation. Now, the Latin word for variation is variatio, losing an N from the English. And what it basically is that Ovid likes to use a variety of ways to list the qualities possessed by Dipsas to make the passage less monotonous. Now, in theory, he could just go bullet point, bullet point, bullet point, bullet point, all starting with the same word. So he could say, Dipsas is able to do the following things: fly around, sing magical spells, turn river back to its source. Now that, quite frankly, that's sort of listing. By the time you get to the 3rd or 4th point, you just get a bit bored. But if there's a variety of ways of saying it, then that might work. And you notice if you remember the couplets that we talked about earlier on, in all the couplets it showcases different ways of introducing what she knows or what she is able to do. Perhaps is to start with, she knows well, which in Latin is scit bene. Let's pick another word for to know it. Then maybe it's about when she wants to do something, cum voluit. Then maybe it's what I think, that's Ovid that, by the way, what I think or what I suspect she could do, suspicor. There are all these different ways of introducing it, and it makes it more dynamic rather than just pounding you with cannonballs of the same size and shape. There's a variety of points from different angles with different elaboration, so that even though you're kind of getting the same sort of information, you're getting it in a slightly different way, and it makes it more interesting. If you could spot it as well, in lines 9 to 10, he uses an active and a passive verb. I think the passive verb is are gathered, right? The clouds are gathered from the whole sky. And in lines 11 to 12, he uses an ablative dependence upon an adjective. Ooh, that's a very tricky thing. Let me see if I can remember that line. It must be about how it's purple with blood or shining with blood. Yeah, there's a repetition of sanguine, but in one case he uses a participle and in another case he uses an adjective. Okay, so these are the variety of points we've got. We'll now go on to look at the passage, and this is where you could start noting something down. Now, hopefully you already have this document with you when I've provided this work for you, which is a plain Latin text, and we're going to put the style points on here by highlighting this. It's just a bit easier than working on OneNote. That's what I found over the previous works that I've set as work for you anyway. You might also want to have the translation side by side next to it, so that you know what your points refer to. I won't on my screen, but if you wish to, well, I think you should, just so you know when you're making a stylistic point, you know what that section is about, and therefore you know what Ovid is trying to emphasize. Okay, now I'm just going to put this full screen so you can see a little bit clearer, and we're going to go down the lines and we're going to look for the points line by line. I wanted to do this rather than doing it technique by technique, so that you can see the story as a story from start to finish, and you can see how all these stylistic points work with the story. As I say, these texts are about the narrative, about the story, rather than the techniques. There is no point having the techniques if there isn't a story to tell, if Ovid doesn't have any intention through his text. Okay, make notes on the work by using the comments function. Wherever you wish to make a comment, colon, at the top bar, click review, then new comments. Good. I'm correcting myself as we go. So that's the top bar, and that's the new comments button. And let's start with Esquidam. So I highlight it and I click new comment. It should go to the sidebar. Okay. Now what it is about Esquidam as a phrase is that it's at an emphatic position, or rather the position gives it emphasis, right? So why is it at an emphatic position? It's at the start of a line, start of the whole poem. This is line 1 of the poem as well. So what it emphasizes, I mean the phrase, now this is where I say the translation is important. The phrase means there is a certain someone. In this case there is a certain old woman. I suppose it's really trying to draw your attention to this certain person. So draws your attention to the character which this whole text is about. Okay, if Ovid's mission in this text is to tell you more about Dipsas and to give her qualities that are negative and so on, then making sure you know what this whole poem is about is going to be pretty useful, right? So that's why he does it. And he re-emphasized that by repeating the phrase in line 2 as well. That's effectively 2 style points where you've been asked for that. Isn't that great? 2 for the price of 1. So there's a bit of repetition, and the position of the word makes it interesting. I mean, at this point you could make another comment if you want, like repeated from line 1. You can, but you don't have to. I move on. Right, okay. What else is there? I'm trying to remember what I've put on the list. Well, there's the idea of the preposition here. It seems a bit strange to start with Xray, nomen habet. So if you think of Xray meaning from her nature has her name. Okay. Now, if Xray, not X-ray as in what you learn in science, if Xray means from her nature, putting that at the start almost looks like she's drawing her name out from her nature. So you start from her nature, and then later on you get the name. That sequential sense, that way of sequencing the words makes the sentence mirror what is actually going on. So it's quite hard to explain that, but you can say putting Xray at the beginning of this sentence makes the order of the words here mirror what it is describing. Sorted. Okay, we then had, in this sentence, we then had the N sound, didn't we? Yep. And why is it that there was an N sound? Well, in this passage, it talks about, in fact, the N sound goes on to memnonis, so really my comment should be a bit further. But there is the N sound maybe to show the drunkenness, to show that he is, she is often like nonsensical at that time, and that drunkenness may be added in this, in the repetition of S sound here as well. You can, I know you don't know anything about drunkenness. Of course you wouldn't, but it almost sounds a bit like a slurring of words, right? The effect of drunkenness is being emphasized. So again, telling you what a strange person that she is so drunk that she can't, drunkenness, is that how you spell it? How do you spell it? Right, she's so drunk that she isn't even sober in the morning when people are not normally drunk. Okay? Here, it starts with the phrase word ila. You notice she's used the word ila before, but I guess using ila at the start of a line emphasizes the story or the poem is about her. All right. I almost wonder whether Ila, that woman, sounds a bit negative. You could make that point. She could be. I mean, Ovid could be even more negative by using ista, which is definitely a negative word meaning that woman. But here. The fact that he doesn't repeat her name again, or he doesn't even just omit it, but he really specifies it is that woman, almost sounds a bit accusatory. You could imagine him actually pointing the finger at her, or, you know, pointing the finger at where he would imagine her to be when he's reading his poem, just to make it sound a bit more aggressive. That woman, right? Coincidentally, the word ila, or at least ile, is where you get the French word il, he, from, and elle, she, comes from ila. You don't need to know that. That's not part of your exam. But you could definitely make this point about the ah sound. Ovid is talking about how she can do spells, so almost the a sound almost sounds like chanting spells. Yeah, that. Okay, now further down, okay, there's the image of the fact that she can turn a river back to its source, and so this is quite a striking image. All right, it looks ridiculous. My spelling of ridiculous also looks ridiculous. It looks ridiculous, and makes her look ridiculous. And I don't even notice that in this sentence, the way that the word order is that towards the source, the flowing by art turns back the river or the waters. You start with the source, although you'd normally expect this to be towards the end of the sentence, and you end with the river, whereas you'd normally expect that to be before the verb. So the word order here mirrors what is described again. All right, the source comes first, as if she genuinely had turned the river back to its source. And notice that the word in, comes first there. Okay. If you are looking out for a couplet, you can already see that the couplets here of lines 5 and 6. Okay, line 5 is almost describing how she does it, all right, and line 6 is describing what she aims to achieve with that. So she knows the skills and the spells, and in order to achieve turning the river back to its source. And that's quite neat, and you can make that as a style point altogether. All right, so what was it? Line 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So line 5 is how she does it. Line 6, what she achieves with the magic. And so the couplet ties the two neatly. Okay, so that's lines 5 to 6. Lines 7 to 8 also has that purpose. Can you remember what we said about the couplets doing there? Okay, firstly, he starts with the verb skits bene to introduce 3 quits. So your quits, your 3 times of quits is an anaphora, which means that the word is repeated at the start of a clause. In this case, it's repeated at the start of a bit that explains what she knows how to do. The 3 whats are what she knows. In fact, it's not so much what she knows how to do. The 3 whats are what she knows in terms of the power of certain things that she has available to her as a sorceress. So it's an anaphora and is at the start of a list. Okay, and that repetition really works. They all depend on walayat as well. So all 3 things depend on one word, which actually makes the word very powerful. And funnily enough, the word walayat means the power something has. Notice that in this couplet includes matches the sentence, and what this means is in this neat long line short line, the whole sentence, that's the whole sentence. It makes it quite neat. It makes the audience better appreciate that everything within these 2 lines work together. And Ovid is pretty good with that. The couplet is almost a way for him to organize his thoughts in the poem. In this part, you've got cum voluit, which are repeated at the start of the line, and then it gives it does that in order to give structure to the list. And another way that it gives structures to a list is there is a symmetry in the couplet to give structure to the list. Again, this makes it easier for audience to understand the power of dipsas. You can almost, working in pairs, and here the lines are working in pairs. It's almost quite easy to think, on the one hand, whenever she wants, she can, the clouds are gathered from the whole sky. Whenever she wants, daylight shines from within her eyeballs. There's a neat symmetry there, and because as an audience listening to this meter where there's one long line and one short line, you're almost expecting everything to come in pairs, and the fact that it actually does come in pair makes it easy for you to understand. Now, you don't necessarily have to go into all that detail. What you just need to do when you write an answer is your point, evidence and analysis. So all you have to say is Ovid has a symmetrical structure in the 2 lines of the couplet. In lines, what lines are they again? In lines 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. In lines 9 to 10, to make it easy to understand these 2 things that Dipsas can do when she wants. To make her power sounds more terrifying, or to make her sound more terrifying. That would do. That would do. Okay. So this must be line 11 then, I'm guessing. Okay. By the way, the image here, and I know I didn't quite... the image here is quite striking, isn't it? Now hopefully you feel the same way as I do. If you don't, then don't worry. But if you do not feel as awestruck by this line as I do, then I am slightly worried, because he's got daylight shining from his eyes and he can gather clouds. He's working against, or she's working against nature. Okay. Memorable. This makes it memorable for the audience, almost a bit funny. Okay, so people really get the points. This is what she could really do. You could also argue that it's exaggeration. But if you argue that it's exaggeration, you would be arguing that she could actually do these things. So you can make your mind up. Is she actually a sorceress or not? Line 11. Yes, we've got there. Line 11. Well, first thing I've noticed is that if you hear the sound, sanguine sequa fide stilantia sidera vidi. This is sound. Now, why is there a S sound? I don't know. You could argue it whatever way. The S sound could be to do with the flowing of the blood. Ooh, strange thought. It could be to do with the chillingness of it, or maybe it's to re-emphasize the idea of stars. The word sidera means stars, and it's got that z starts to the word. So if you have that repetition of it, then you could do. But either way, it makes the whole thing sound a bit spooky. It makes her ability to do these things sound positively strange. Okay. I think what we've also said is the sanguine as well in the next word. So it really gets you thinking about blood. So it gets the image of blood stuck in your head. That's pretty shocking, isn't it? In the sense that it really makes you feel a little bit creeped out. And as I say, there's a sort of balance here in the sense that, and this is perhaps a higher level point. I won't type this out, but here it is. I saw the stars dripping. Is it dripping or flowing? With blood. Okay, so flowing with blood. Here it is, the face of the moon is purple with blood. Even though on balance on these two couplets, there's a repetition of the word is used in slightly different ways. So in this couplet, on the one hand, you've got similarities across the two lines, but on the other hand, that word is used in slightly different ways. It's in a different position, and in the first of the two lines is used with stilantia, a present participle meaning flowing or dripping. In the second of the two lines is used with purpureus, an adjective meaning purple. Actually, it's more sort of red purplish type color, disgusting sort of color. So Ovid is both innovating but also making sure that he sticks with the words that would make you feel a little bit awestruck. Yeah. Okay. Now, this must be line 13, I'm guessing. I was going to say there's an emphasis on the V sound. I'm not entirely sure, but if there is, maybe it's to reinforce the idea of flying. After all, for the Romans, the letter U would have been the same as the letter V, but of course they're doing slightly different things here. And there's also nocturnas as well. You could put that down if you're convinced. Now here, again, you have a whole couplet that is a whole sentence. Again, it just makes it neat, so you know quite neatly that there are two things that I suspect. All right, so let me try and make a comment. So couplet is a sentence here, so the sentence equals a couplet listing to things that Ovid suspects. So the first one is that he flies around, or she flies around at night, and the second one is that she's covered by feathers, which are interlinked, because I guess the feathers must be to do with the flying. Notice the first thing that Ovid suspects that she does is all in that first of two lines, and the second thing that Ovid suspects is in the second of two lines. You perhaps would almost expect Ovid to talk about the feathers first before he talks about the flying, but I wonder whether he's deliberately inverting that to give a sense of strangeness. Again, I might be reading too much to it, but certainly the couplets there makes it easier for the audience to relate the two linked points about the power of dipsas. It does, doesn't it? Flying around, maybe with her top hat. I don't know if Roman sorceress has that pointy hat as well that I saw in some of the images that you've drawn about the sorceress. Okay, now by this point there's then a repetition of there's one more point about this, which is the fact that the word through, like to literally go through the nocturnas umbras, the word through, per equals through, is located in the middle of what she is flying through. That is to say that she's flying through the nocturnas umbras. She's flying through the nightly shades, right? And the word through actually goes in the middle between those two things. So it mirrors what it describes. The way that the words are ordered matches what he wants to say. I think that's quite wondrous. That they're called preposition, but for Ovid they rarely are preposition in the sense that it just goes in front of what it's meant to go in front of, and that's because he wants to make these striking images in the way that he writes things. I suspect anyway, which moves on to I suspect. Now I suspect twice. Suspico is repeated twice. Now this sounds strange because it emphasizes that he is unsure if it is true. Now if you think about it, he wants to denigrate dipsas. He wants to make her sound abnormal, so why put doubts into it? Well, there are two reasons. One that is more straightforward, and other one that is perhaps more stretch and challenge. The first simple point might just be that actually all these things are pretty wondrous anyway, so I suspect is to add into the fact that these are pretty difficult things to believe. I hope you find these things difficult to believe. I hope you do find them difficult to believe that they will exist in real life. The second point is that Ovid is quite a subversive poet. Now the word subversive is really hard to explain. Someone who's always going against the convention, who's always undermining things, and in this case he likes to undermine himself as well. So this isn't really necessarily the purpose of the poem anymore, but it's what Ovid wants from what he writes. And when he writes, he likes to make it sound like that he doesn't really care much. He's just going to write the most outrageous things, and you can believe it if you want, and if you don't want to, then you don't. He's doing it for his own sake. So I'm sorry, this is probably university level stuff, but I almost wondered whether he's trying to say, Yeah, I'm just thinking this, and it is rumoured. He's almost giving you like a sort of nod and a wink. If you watch Jeremy Clarkson, for example, it's almost like he's deliberately telling you a lie or telling you something really exaggerated, and he's inviting you to believe it in a really tempting way. Whereas if you think about it, you know it's probably a fib anyway. Yeah, that's sort of subversiveness. If you know what subversiveness is, tell me. I'd love to know. Okay. That was exciting, wasn't it? Let's have a look and see what else there are in this line. There's not so much here, perhaps. There's some rather graphic image, like eyes arriving or coming from his twinned orbs. Again, those shooting laser beams from the eye. And this pupilla duplex, which is a pretty strange thing to say, a sort of double pupils. You can make these points if you want, but I don't think they're necessarily the strongest points. Okay, on the final couplet then. And by the way, you should see actually from the place where the full stops are that these couplets all the way down generally work within, like these couplets are independent sentences. A wakat. Now this is quite a striking word. It's at this. I'm sure there was something else that I was meant to say earlier on. Sorry, let me just have a quick look. No, can't see it. Okay, if I seem to have missed something, then let me know. Now I quite like the way that this sentence is arranged. So a wakat means he calls out, and it's at the start. Let me put these in quotation marks. So but I know it's a bit late now. You don't have to write down exactly what I write as long as you understand my point and you put down something that you understand. Okay, so a wakat, he calls out at the start of the sentence to emphasize his power. Yep. And then what I quite like is that the tombs. Now do you notice, and I'll just use a highlighter here. Okay, the word for tomb is sepulchris, right? Can I highlight it in grey? That's the colour of a tomb, isn't it? Okay, and they're described as ancient or old. So he calls out from the ancient tomb his ancestors, his however many great his grandfathers are. And what I really like about this sentence is the fact that the way the words are arranged mirrors what it says. So sorry, the comment is covering up the highlighting, but let me explain. So he's clearly outside of the tombs. Then you've got the tombs, antiquis and sepulchris, right? And then you've got the ancestors, which are in the middle. So the ancestors are within the tombs, or within the ancient tombs. Let's just change that. In terms of word order, and Dipsas is outside of the tombs, calling them out. I think Ovid is a genius, don't you? The way that the order of the sentence goes mirrors exactly what is going on, and that makes it really easy for you to understand what is going on there. It's almost like providing an image. You know, sometimes people say you shouldn't provide an image to a story because it makes it really easy to understand. Well, there you are. The way that the words are ordered is an image there, and it goes on really to do that. In the last line, he plays a very similar trick. because if you think about it, okay, she splits open the solid earth with a long spell. Now your solid earth, which let's find a suitable color. Let's make it, is that brown? Yeah, sorry, it's a bit disgusting, but that's the earth color, right? So solid earth is there, and then with a long spell, she splits it. She splits it open. Yeah, and do you see the ground's already been split open? Look, the word solid and the word ground is either side of what she does to it. The splitting with long spell. That's genius. Come on, you've got to admit that is pretty good, isn't it? Yeah. I'm lost for words. I need to go and lie down somewhere quiet in a moment. But can I just copy what I've said the last time, right? The word order mirrors what rather than what he says, maybe what is described. Okay. Solid ground is actually split open by her long spell, as the word order suggests. Now partly it's about making it vivid, but partly by having it in that order, it reinforces the idea as well that she can do that, and I think that's what makes it quite striking. So there you have it. If you want to have a few more things, then you might want to think about certain things like the variation along the lines. I won't type this down, but notice the different ways that he makes a point. All these couplets are different, aren't they? So in this couplet he talks about how she can, like the two things that she can do in terms of the ground. The theme is the ground, because if you think about the tomb, that's related to the underworld, and then it links in with the word she calls out. Here is to do with the eyes, so that's quite a neat sort of theme with these couplets, and is the way that he says it in these 4 lines is that she just does it. The double pupil shines and light comes out. These ones are just the two of the things does the verb. This one is the fact that she does it, she calls out and she splits. In this one, Ovid starts with I suspect, and I suspect 2 things. The fact that she flies around and the fact that she's covered. In these ones, is to do with I saw, what Ovid sees, and to do with her face. In this one, what she could do is introduced by whenever she wants, or when she has wanted it. In this one is introduced by she knows well. In this one, it is introduced by she knew, and she turns back. This one actually, there's a variation within the couplets as well. So throughout the passage, there's a sense of variation. It's not just one bullet point after another, and it's to keep you on your toes. And that's why under the stretch and challenge, I've put down the ideas of variation. But nonetheless, and you'll notice I haven't really talked much about listing, the whole thing is a list. So where you've been asked about it, you can always mention that there is a list. Where there are some sort of comparison, or where there's some sort of structure, like the ones introduced by Wallowitz, or where there's a structure here, like these ones are introduced by what she knows well, like she knows well what, and what. These are better points, or better places to make the points about listing. But other than the brief introduction high up here, these are all lists already, and hopefully you will have created a list of comments like this. Can I just ask you to let me know whether you prefer the style points to be done this way, or whether you'd prefer doing more of the work yourself? I don't really mind, but of course the more you can feedback to me, the more I can make this work presented in the best way for you. And when you're ready, we'll move on to the next 2 activities, next 2 questions. Okay, I notice I've spoken for quite a significant amount of time. I was getting a bit carried away. I always love to read a bit of Ovid, you see. So, I'm just going to leave you to get on with these exam-style questions. There are two. This is a 6-mark question, and this is a 16-mark question, but I just want you to make 1 point rather than all the points that you need to answer the 16-mark question. So, on the 6-mark question, I'd like you to work out how Ovid's style of writing emphasizes the supernatural ability of dipsas in lines 13 to 18. Now really, in the exam paper, you'd be given basically 3 bullet points to show that you need to make 3 points, and then you have about 3 or 4 lines per bullet point. You don't have to write masses and masses. All you have to do is to show, like, pick out the right bit of Latin and then make a comment about how it shows off the supernatural ability of dipsas. And you're going to have to use some of the style points that we've discussed earlier on in this passage. Whereas for the 16-mark question, what I'd like you to do is just to make 1 point to prove that those who know magic are capable of powerful things. I would say go with your instinct here. You could probably say certain things about, maybe you could give a theme to what she's capable of doing. So, you could say that those who know magic is capable of moving the stars, or reverting nature. That would certainly be a point that you could make here. In fact, that's possibly the only point that you can make here. Or you could just say that she's so dreadful that when people come across him, they would feel the power just by looking at her. That might be another point that you could make as well. For some of you who are working at a higher level, rather than just make any point, I would like you to specifically make a point that disagrees with the statement. And the way that you might be able to do it is to consider whether Ovid is being subversive in the way that he writes. If you don't think he's serious about this piece of writing, if you think that he's just not so much exaggerating as, spreading random rumors about her, then if you don't think he's serious, then what he says can't have any value, can it? I'm going to explain to you what the last 2 things are as well in the next 2 slides, and you don't need to they're optional, right? So certainly for some of you, I'd like you to read the extracts that I'm going to post on here from How to Read a Latin Poem. It's a nice way of understanding what Ovid is and to understand Ovid beyond this text. Or the other option is to consider the 2 singles about the ability of women, or the portrayal of women. One thing that I'm always interested about all this is we don't have enough women voices from antiquity. So, even the song by Cliff Richard in 1976, it's written very much possibly from a background of a man. Now, women may embrace that sort of portrayal of power, although the devilish part I don't know so much. Certainly, if you listen to, for example, Little Mix's song about magic, you would see that how sometimes women do embrace that portrayal as well. Although if you listen to Laura Mvula, or indeed the poem by Maya Angelou, you would see that actually women are just quite proud of their innate ability to do great things without having to use magical or supernatural terms to it. So these are some questions for you to consider, and you'd certainly need to look up the lyrics to it. I look forward to seeing what you can do, and I look forward to hearing your comments about the work that has been set as well, because what I do know is I'm spending a lot of time explaining things to you. Perhaps you find that reassuring. Perhaps you feel that you want to get on with the work yourself more rather than me telling you all the answers. And one thing that I would certainly suggest is the more you can work something out yourself, the more it's going to go in yourself. But of course, if you feel I've set you a piece of work where you can't do yourself, then you're not going to achieve anything because you're not going to be able to do it. So a few things for you to think about there. Let me know if there's any questions about this work.